Okay. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Laverne Miller from the Gain Center, and I just want to say thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. But I believe that this will be a wonderful opportunity for everyone to give a first-hand depiction of assisted outpatient treatment programs. Over the past few months, I've spoken to, we've all talked about, how we can really work together, both peers, family members, and other stakeholders to ensure that assisted outpatient treatment really does lead to, and all the services that are enhanced services that are offered does lead to a life in the community and an excellent quality of life. And I think our speaker, I know our speaker, Mr. Eric Smith, is, he's going to talk to you today, and then hopefully some of you are able to join, to see him, that you've actually got your computers up and running. But Eric is an advocate, and Eric has really turned his experiences and his family's experiences with assisted outpatient treatment really into an asset to be really able to talk to policymakers, leaders, as well as family members and other peers about his experiences, about how what a positive impact assisted outpatient treatment has had on his life and his future, but also to provide policymakers with some suggestions about, indeed, how they can improve assisted outpatient treatment. So Eric has been a featured speaker at assisted outpatient treatment conferences in Las Vegas and the Texas State Capitol, Austin. He's a habitual honors student, an undergraduate student who's on track to graduate in the top 10% of his class in May of 2018. And we're very proud that Eric's been accepted into graduate school to pursue a Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling degree. And he's going to start shortly, from what I understand. And so Eric's journey has been captured in a documentary entitled Stopping the Revolving Door, A Civil Approach to Treating Severe Mental Illness. So without further ado, the format we're going to have today is it's going to be a question and answer. I'm going to interview Eric, and then our goal is to leave about 20 minutes or so for there'll be a Q&A session with all of you that are on the phone. However, if a question comes up before we actually get to the Q&A period, please use your chat box, which should be at the lower right-hand quadrant of your PC. And I want to apologize ahead of time about the scratchiness of my voice. I don't mean to sound like Barry White on an album record. But, hi Eric, can you please, welcome and good afternoon. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself that you'd like to share with the group?
Sure. Thank you, Laverne. First off, hello, everyone. And I'd really like to thank all of you for taking an interest in AOT. And I appreciate you taking the time to hear my story on how my life and experiences I've been through relate to AOT, especially on a Friday. I know we all love our Fridays, and I know your time is valuable regardless of the day, and I thank you. So as Laverne said, I had a personal experience with AOT, which will be discussed fairly in depth throughout this call. And I, since that time, have achieved things that I'm proud of that I hope are a testament to the value of AOT, such as my acceptance into graduate school that I start this summer of 2018. I will be pursuing, as she said, a Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling degree. I'm very excited to add credentials to my name to add to the fact that I enjoy advocating for AOT as a matter of it not just being a life-saving measure for myself, but a life-changing measure for society as well. And I'm hoping by the end of this call, you'll see that the experiences I've been through and the experiences I've had with AOT support that. One quick note to the documentary that I was in, if you do happen to see it or if you've already seen it, they refer to something called IOPC, and that's Involuntary Outpatient Commitment Program, which is essentially what Texas calls AOT the overall arching program that the judge oversees someone like myself with mental illness on the inpatient side of things, and then transitions to the outpatient side of things, and then ultimately the goal would be to have someone no longer requiring the order to be on that program at all. And that's just a little bit about me, so I'd like to turn it back over to Laverne for the next question, please.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, how old were you when you began to feel a little bit different, when you thought, that there was something different going on with you than with your peers?
Thank you. That's a great question, largely because it helps to highlight that I did not identify really as feeling different or out of the ordinary, because I'd only known how it felt to be me. And since I've always been bipolar with, OCD tendencies and ADHD, to me that was the norm. And until I was about 15 years of age, when I was officially diagnosed by a psychiatrist for the first time, I had no reason to think the way I felt was somehow categorized as different.
And Eric, can you talk about what a day before you actually became involved in treatment? What was a day in your life actually like? Can you tell the audience?
Sure. In retrospect, most days in my life were, unbeknownst to me, relatively chaotic by comparison to people who aren't afflicted with bipolar disorder, which is what I've been diagnosed with, or other forms of serious mental illness. And the norm of my days was filled with doctor-prescribed medications that did little to assist as a remedy. So I'd be prescribed one cocktail of drugs after another over many, many years, actually from about 98 until 2011. And it was a semi-regular occurrence for me to be taken off one or more drugs to be replaced by others. And that actually, my life sort of revolved around all of that. It was medicines that would work for a little while and then medicines that weren't. And as you might suspect, when they weren't working, things were bad. And even when they were, it was just temporary.
When you, as you say, you kind of there were some challenges that you experienced during this period of time. What was the initial response of your parents, Eric?
Well, the initial response of my parents was, okay, so I didn't be much better at answering this question, but I suspect it was a mix of comfort and sadness. Comfort that they now had an explanation for the way I acted, since there was a diagnosis to accompany the way I was acting, and sadness that it's something that I had to deal with. I imagine that as parents, you want to do everything you can to help your child, and when you hear stuff like that as a parent, there's not much that you can do other than connect them with the appropriate professionals or lifelines or mechanisms that are in place if the place that you live is lucky enough to have something like AOT. That stated, they did respond with love and concern for my well-being, and remain eternally grateful that something like AOT was available in the area that we reside.
Eric, when you were first diagnosed and you were on medications and some worked, some didn't, did you feel like you had an opportunity really to talk to your psychiatrist about the medications, about why they weren't working, about what you needed?
Yes. So I actually went through a number of psychiatrists before I was ultimately hospitalized for the first time. And part of that had to do with frustration with myself. I was frustrated with myself. My parents were frustrated that, a psychiatrist would see me, diagnose me, read my medical records, speak with me, prescribe medicines that ultimately weren't working. I was getting a number of untoward side effects, such as weight gain, lots of sleeplessness, lots of too much sleeping, lots of life-interrupting things. And so we would move to another psychiatrist because it looked like what that psychiatrist was doing perhaps wasn't working at all. But ultimately, there wasn't a magic bullet, so to say, to fix me, or a magic medication that's going to make it all better. Although I will defer and say that the medicine that I'm on now, which is called Clozaril, the generic is clozapine. The reason I'm able to take this medicine now, and this is not a joke, the reason that I'm able to take this medicine, which has worked wonders for my life over the last 5+ years I've been on it, is because I failed at every other medicine that was meant to treat my diagnoses. the insurance companies would not allow me to be on the medicine I'm on now until I proved failure of the entire list of others. And that has to do really with money being the bottom line, that the medicine I'm on now requires lab work, is regular upkeep to watch certain blood counts. I believe it's the CBC, ANC, and they watch my white blood cell counts.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, none of the medicines worked. And the psychiatrists I saw, they really threw everything at me under the sun. It was antidepressants. They gave me ADHD meds. That didn't work for my ADD. Just to make a long story short, nothing worked until luckily this thing I'm on now, which other people like myself have to fail if they want to be able to be provided this medicine. They must have failed everything else. And if people are lucky enough to survive that long journey of failed medicines and all the chaos that ensues from point A to point Z, it's just unfortunate that that's the way the system is currently set up.
Yeah, so it seems like at least one of the suggestions that you'd be making to policymakers, both in the in state insurance as well as Medicaid and private insurers and other folks that where you have to get, where actually there's got to the prescription for the medication that has really worked wonders for you, where it has to be authorized prior to dispensing to you. One of the suggestions it sounds like is that basically that one size doesn't fit all, and that there really does need to be more flexibility in terms of the kinds of medications that are really made available in the first instance, as opposed to, as you said, kind of trying it and failing and trying something else and failing, and then only then this particular medication being really available to you.
That's exactly. I would echo the sentiment that you just said verbatim, and I would also like to add that I understand that pharmaceuticals is a business. I do understand that's how it is, but I also understand that when it comes to bottom line and saving money, and when the majority of the people that are paying for things the majority of the people paying for things, I think if they're educated to understand that what I'm costing society not medicated is far outweighing what I cost medicated with these monthly labs. And I say that because factoring in interactions that people like myself have with police and police resources needing to be called out, being put into the jail system, needing to be, basically taken care of and paid for while I'm in jail because I have to eat. I'm housed in the jail. The police need to get paid. Basically, taxes and time and resources and energy are being used by people because I was busy failing on a bunch of medicines because the insurance companies were saying you've got to fail before you can get to this point. And had I had the opportunity to be tried on that medicine without going through all of that, sure, in retrospect, that would have been time saved in police resources, money saved from taxpayers who are needing to foot bills for people who are in jail, and police salaries and whatnot. And surely there's an alternate route that more effectively can help treat people when the bottom line is still looked at as money, and money can be looked at as being saved even when the expense is a medicine that someone like myself needs. Does it perhaps balance out with the amount of money that taxpayers are saving and cities are saving in time, energy, and resources? Studies that the Treatment Advocacy Center have released show yes, and at conferences that I spoke at where I was lucky enough to be there with them, I was able to see the numbers and the figures, and I would direct you either to their website or to reach out to them to ask, and perhaps policy research associates are also aware of these same things, where it isn't just a matter of like, what's the money spent? The other side of it is what money is being saved when treatment is offered.
Thank you, Eric, and you're absolutely right that that there are studies that show that there is a cost savings when folks are able to involved in treatment as opposed to really using high cost inpatient crisis services or follow that trajectory that many folks, particularly males, kind of move into, which is involvement in the criminal justice system. So what I wanted to do is can you talk to us about how you became involved in the criminal justice system before you then had assisted outpatient treatment as an option for you?
Sure. So yes, I was involved in the criminal justice system, but not at all prior to when my mental stability unfolded. So in the days leading up to my first hospitalization, I had conversations with a few different police officers who were responding to phone calls they had received about me appearing to be a suspicious person. Looking back at it, I'm sure I was appearing to be suspicious because I was unraveling mentally. So I wasn't really breaking, like I wasn't violent or breaking laws in the sense that, you know, police were pulling me over, but, you know, wherever I was appearing suspicious. And every police officer who spoke with me did display the highest level of professionalism and care for me as a human being. And each of them expressed sympathy for my situation, which at that time included me living in my car. And I'd like to probably highlight and sort of make an educated guess that the reason I didn't have, you know, violent or, you know, terrifying altercations with police is because the area I live in, the San Antonio, the Bexar County area, we have a very excellent setup as far as something like AOT and mental illness, the sort of AOT courts as opposed to putting someone in the criminal justice system. We have a fairly nice setup, and the police in our area, luckily for me, were aware of something like that. So they did express sympathy of my situation, and had my mania been bad enough, however, during any of those interactions, it's entirely possible I could have provoked a confrontation that might have resulted in officers responding with justified lethal force. But thankfully, AOT intervened before this chance became a reality. So even though I was ultimately brought to jail first because I was arrested on a trespassing charge, it was nonviolent, but you know, I was somewhere that I was told not to be. So I was trespassing, and they took me to jail. But even though I was in jail for a month, I was then moved from jail to the San Antonio State Hospital as part of my first court-ordered AOT mental health treatment. And I'm grateful that I wasn't, you know, treated as a criminal from beginning to end. So apparently, you know, wheels were in motion while I was in jail that ultimately helped me get moved out of the criminal justice system and into something like AOT to be treated for mental health instead of being treated as a criminal.
Mm-hmm. So Eric, just stepping back a bit, can you talk to us about what that process was like in terms of your appearing with, you know, getting what we call diverted from the criminal justice system, from jail into the civil side of things with assisted outpatient treatment? Can you talk to us about what that process was like for you?
Sure. It was not a smooth transition, although since that time I'm of the understanding that it's become more smooth for people similar to like myself. But speaking to my experience, while I was in jail, my family relentlessly fought to explain the extent of my mental illness to law enforcement and the jail. In addition to me being extremely manic, delusional, and paranoid while I was in jail, I was not provided the medicine that I was prescribed as a free citizen. So they did have something set up in jail to provide, you know, medicines in the same realm as the medicines that I was prescribed. But, you know, they're a jail. They're not a pharmacy. So they've got, you know, essentials on hand and what doctors have deemed as, you know, we need to have something like an antidepressant or an antipsychotic, et cetera. But, you know, professionals and even, you know, laymen such as myself can understand that one medicine in one category of drugs is not the same by any means as another medicine in the same category of drugs. And so I was not provided the medicine I got as a free citizen. And this compounded an already very messy issue. And I reached a new level of chaos in my mind while incarcerated, in part because of this. Ultimately, I was transferred from jail to the state hospital because jail was not the proper venue to dispense the mental health treatment I needed. And with the relentless communication between my parents and the local law enforcement, I got extremely lucky that the state hospital had a bed opened up right as I was about to be released from jail, because they couldn't keep me like infinitely. They couldn't just keep me there, and I hadn't really been deemed a danger to myself or a danger to others at that point. So as a matter of legal protocol, they would have released me if SASH hadn't made, SASH being the San Antonio State Hospital, if they didn't have a bed and request my transport. So, you know, I'm very lucky, and I remain incredibly thankful that something like that, a very lucky break that a bed opened up for me. Laverne, I think I see you asking a question, but I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was listening to you, Eric. And how long were you in the state hospital, Eric?
I was in the state hospital the first time. I was in the hospital 3 times total, and this is the sort of, rough timeline of that. So from the very end of 2008 into the beginning of 2009, I had a 3-month stay in SASH. 2011 then rolled around, and I was put back into the state hospital for another 3 months. I was released. I was out for just a few weeks, right back in the hospital for another 3 months. So this is a 9 months total, and I got out in 2012, February of 2012, and I have not been court ordered to do anything since I was released from the AOT program on 2012. And I was in the hospital 3 times, and some people might make an argument saying, 3-month stays with, 2 of them being separated by only a few weeks, that's an argument for why something like this doesn't work. And to them I'd say, no, when it doesn't work is when someone like myself who can't be put onto an AOT program with a judge that's familiar with my case is mental illness, and the law enforcement that's familiar with my case, and the hospitals and doctors and the whole treatment team, the ease with which I was able to be brought back into the hospital for the life-saving treatment is entirely a product of AOT and laws and procedures that are in place in this area, because otherwise I could have very easily been taken back into jail or not put into a hospital in jurisdictions that are not like San Antonio, do not allow people to be placed on a hold for life-saving treatment because they view it as a violation of civil rights. And I assure you that I appreciate wholeheartedly 100% everyone who's fighting for people like myself to have the civil rights of not being involuntarily committed. But I also know speaking firsthand, and even though I know it's anecdotal, there are plenty of other stories to support this. The people who do not receive the life-saving treatment afforded by AOT, they become a number, a statistic. Are they dropped off in the middle of the night in front of a hospital at a bus stop? Sure, that's been in the news. Are they involved in, preventable altercations with society? Sure, that also is in the news. Are they wasting taxpayer money because hospitals aren't treating them and jails are forced to? That too. So, I appreciate that those who fight for civil rights, but I also understand that all of the success that I've achieved since that time is a product of the mechanism of AOT and treatment teams being in place. I didn't just magically get better someday. It was the work of a lot of people behind the scenes involved with treatment teams, including judge, doctor, social workers, medical professionals, and others of the like. And without that, I'm not here having this webinar. Who knows where I'd be.
So Eric, can you talk to us about the kinds of services that you received when you were on assisted outpatient treatment and what differences those treatments made in your recovery process?
Sure. So to answer this question, I'd like to paint a picture of what things were like on the inpatient side of things, because without that, I would not have been led to the outpatient side of things. So it really is the starter. It's the way it's set up. The outpatient is a next step from people like myself who have been inpatient. So since they are so inexplicably interconnected, I'd like to paint a picture of what that's like and then walk you through towards the end of the AOT order. And so prior to being court ordered to stay at a hospital, I had no idea that a judge could have the power to hospitalize me or anyone else as a product of mental illness. And I remember feeling upset when I learned this to be true. At that time, I thought it to be extremely unfair that a judge who had no idea who I was and who knew very little about me could remove me from society and commit me to a hospital, essentially discounting any opinion I might have on that matter. Without a doubt, this initially caused some pushback on my end about wanting to take part in my medical treatment because I had virtually no say in any of it, being that it was court-ordered. Hospital staff did inform me of my right to refuse taking medications, but by doing so, it would result in the medications being forcefully administered via injection. So my choice to take medicine or not was basically an illusion because at that point in time, it most definitely felt as my rights had been dismissed as unimportant and irrelevant because I didn't want to be in a hospital. I didn't want to be forced to take medications. by doctors who didn't know me and I didn't know them, and they didn't know the full context of my medical history. I thought any choice I had in my treatment was an illusion on the inpatient side of things, the inpatient side of things. And because there was a significant component of paranoia in the manic episode I was experiencing on my first night in the hospital to which I was committed, I feared going to sleep. Each room was set up with 4 beds, meaning I shared a room with 3 people whom I did not know, and part of me thought they might try to hurt me while I slept. In an effort to avoid this type of conflict, I recall choosing to sit in the common area of the hospital to watch TV rather than go to sleep. However, the televisions ultimately were turned off at night as a matter of hospital procedure, and hospital staff told me it was bedtime and so I should go to my room. I peacefully refused to go to my room, stating I was scared of what might be done to me by my roommates while I slept, so I informed the hospital staff I intended to continue sitting in a chair facing the television rather than go to bed, even though the TV was turned off. At that point, several male hospital staff were ordered to pin me down, and they held my arms and legs while I received an injection of some type of drug. Thereafter, I was taken into a small room and strapped to a chair in such a manner that I couldn't move my arms or legs for more than an hour. This was an emotionally traumatic experience that I could not feel as being justified at that time. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm really not still certain the manner in which the hospital treated this event is justifiable. But I bring up this event to exemplify the notion that I do not believe my interactions with caregivers associated with the inpatient side of things were always perfect or desirable, but in the long run, I understand the inpatient portion of my journey was a necessary component for me to enter into the assisted outpatient treatment, AOT. As such, I hold the view that AOT's many positive benefits outweigh the negatives I experienced while being committed to inpatient care, while acknowledging there's room to grow on the inpatient side of things and how patients are ordered to be pinned down and held things when they're not necessarily violently protesting the hospital staff or causing violent altercations. You know, that's a conversation that can be had. So not long after my initial hospital stay under a court order, I found myself back in the hospital with another manic episode. I was released shortly thereafter, which only lasted for a few weeks, and I found myself right back in the hospital for another 3 months. And as stated before, if not for the AOT program, the ease with which I was able to be brought back to the hospital under the court order for life-saving medical treatment would have been non-existent, and that would have translated very likely into some form of tragedy.
Eric, I just have a follow-up question. I've heard the term life-saving quite a number of times. Can you describe for the audience what do you mean by life-saving, treatment, so that folks can get an understanding about kind of where you were really at in terms of your illness?
Sure. So for people who do not experience, paranoid delusional episodes and who aren't diagnosed as bipolar or schizoaffective or schizophrenic or things that really interfere with how reality is experienced, it's a kind of chaos I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So at my worst, there were the voices in my head. Luckily, they weren't ever telling me to hurt people, but I was hearing voices, and at the time, I was living in my car, so I had the ability to drive, and I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want somebody in the throes of a delusional, paranoid, manic episode to be freely driving about. And the life-saving treatment to which I'm referring isn't just to me, I could have, thrown myself off a bridge, or if the voices had told me to do that. It's also for society at large, even though I had, never had a record of being, a danger to other people. There are a number of ways that could have played out, that if AOT wasn't there for me to be, monitored at all times by hospital staff and doctors and looked at by a judge, familiar with the way things should be handled and not treating people like a criminal. Solitary confinement wasn't going to fix me. Putting me in a cell with 20 other people wasn't going to fix me. Giving me my own cell, which I did have at some point, that's not going to fix me. So there's only so much that jails can do. So the life-saving treatment is not just for me that AOT provides to make sure that I'm not hurting myself, or, listening to a voice tell me, hey, this is where it all ends, throw yourself off of a bridge, or being driven to do something, to harm myself that, could result in death. it's also a matter of protection of society. So, society has their rights as well, and I believe they have a right to be safe, and they have the best way to do that with, people who who could fit under the AOT umbrella, really is to make sure that, medical professionals and, mental health court judges and teams working with each other, they're the ones that are treating people like me, not jails where police are, doing their jobs, but their jobs and training, really don't include what needs to be done to treat people like myself. So again, I have to underscore the life-saving measures are for myself and for society at large, and for other people like myself who, should be in an AOT program.
Eric, you've got an enormous, and I'm a person with lived experience myself, and I think one of the biggest challenges that I had once I was diagnosed and in treatment was really, well, even before, but having insight into my illness and what it meant and how I behaved when I wasn't in treatment on a regular basis, or when I didn't, whether it was both the medication and the talk therapy. Can you talk about how you were able to kind of gain insight both into your illness, not being labeled as a schizophrenic or whatever, but kind of what you were experiencing and what it meant and what other kinds of options were available to you other than kind of experiencing the suffering that you were talking about and the fear?
Sure. So thank you for sharing that. And to answer your question, while I was on the inpatient side of things, my doctor at the state hospital ordered that I go to peer support sessions. And my doctor told me I would not be discharged unless I took part in these peer support sessions. And sometimes the format of these sessions was listening to people who had gone through AOT or something similar. And sometimes the sessions were group discussions that centered on fellow inpatients who, like myself, were at the time committed. So it was people I was essentially living with at the hospital. And I do feel like these peer support elements were way more important to my recovery than I knew at the time that I was actively taking part in them. These sessions helped me see that I'm not alone in my battle with mental illness, and that recovery to a point of functioning in society is not only attainable, but entirely possible. And that mechanism is AOT.
So in other words, you would say one of the things that kind of the peer support groups is that it gave you hope. That it was really important for you to see people doing better, talking about their future, and kind of understanding what it was you were experiencing. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And in addition to that, the peer support sessions and other people who had gone through the program coming to speak, I would be, not doing my due diligence if I also failed to mention that there are celebrities all around the world that are currently doing their part. And as a society that sort of worships the idea of celebrity, or if not worship, at the very least pay attention to it readily, there are people that show up in the news. Michael Phelps, for one, he fairly recently, opened up about his battle with suicide, despite not suicide, but that he contemplated suicide rather, and despite being, perhaps one of the greatest Olympians that will ever live. And then we've got people like Demi Lovato, who people unfamiliar with her story, very successful at a very young age as a Disney star musician. She opened up about being bipolar. And then in addition to that, we've got our friends across.
Mariah Carey's the latest one.
Yes.
I think, fortunately, it's almost like a Me Too kind of experience, that there are folks really that feel like they have an opening to really talk about it openly and honestly about what their experiences were. And I think, Eric, folks like you are also important. You may not be a celebrity. You may not think you're a celebrity, but in terms of really being able to disclose and to be open about your challenges is just as important. I want to convey that to you.
Oh,
but,
thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. One question is, how important, can you describe how important the support of your family was throughout your journey?
Yes. So my entire family has been a rock for me, and I don't know what it's like to live with someone like me from another perspective of other than just being with me all the time. But every day that moves forward, I try to take a step out of my shoes and try to feel, what would it be like to be around a person like me at that time, where I was, mentally unstable. I was not at all a participant in reality. I was saying things off the wall, just that they didn't have place in reality. And I imagine that it goes far beyond an unsettling feeling if you're not that person. Like, I didn't feel unsettled at the time, but retrospectively, I look back, and the amount of strength and love and just, relentless fighting that it took between my parents and the jail, and my parents, and the state hospital, who, they wanted to release me after my first stay while I was still delusional, but, I had met my 3 months, and they were just going to, release me. And it was just an ongoing battle to fight the system that just wanted, it wanted basically to let Darwinism take care of me, be released back into society, and, if survival of the fittest was in my favor, great, and if not, that's the way that it was going to be. And I don't say that as hyperbole. I can give you a direct example. The social worker, I know my mom called and spoke with the social worker at the hospital, and my mom was just crying on the phone, just begging them not to release me because I was not in the state to be released yet when they were going to, after my first stay in the hospital. And my mom asked the social worker, what's he going to do when you release him? How's he going to take his meds that are on the way to stabilizing him? How's he going to survive? How's he going to live? And the social worker's response that I think was sort of rooted in the jaded reality of how at that time people such as myself were showing that there was sort of gaps and holes in the way AOT looked at that time. The social worker replied to my mom and said, he can go live under a bridge, and during the day he can panhandle, and with the money he gets, he can, go to the pharmacy and, get meds, and then he can go back to sleep under the bridge. And that is the reality of the way people at that time were just released, because, hey, like, we've done our part, but, there's a gap that goes beyond our responsibility because he can't stay here anymore, and there's really no place for him to go. So it would have been me under a bridge, panhandling for money. And luckily I was able to be kept there a little while longer and stabilized enough that I didn't end up going to live under a bridge. And this might be a whole other conversation or story about things, but I instead of being released to my family under that, one of the, luckily there was a sort of a halfway home type thing, not for people who necessarily abuse drugs or alcohol, but like myself, who had been afflicted with mental illness, and I lived there for a little while. The conditions there, it was a roof over my head, but I left because, and I hope I'm not rambling, but I want to give you an idea of how things looked. There was an individual there, a man who wasn't a danger really to anyone. He was not violent at all, nothing that I ever saw, but he continually drooled into everything, including, like, he would open up my drawers and drool on my clothes. He would, walk over my food and drool in my food and other people's as well. And I remember calling my dad from that sort of halfway home, like, Dad, I'm feeling like, I'm sort of back in reality, but there's this guy here, and, he's not really hurting me, but, like, he's, like, relentlessly drooling on my clothes and in my food and in other people's clothes and food. And when my dad heard about that, he came and got me. And while he didn't know at the time that was violating the court order, because he called the judge and let him know what was happening. And, the next time we went to go see the judge said, I could hold you in contempt for doing that, speaking to my dad. And my dad was like, what would you like me to have done? Because these were the conditions that he was being kept at. And the judge was like, I'm not going to hold you in contempt, but let's give this a shot. Like, I'll release him into y'all's sort of, area, release him into y'all's care. But you'll have to agree that you'll keep his medicines in a lockbox. You'll watch that he takes them. You'll confirm that he's, like, swallowed his pills and all of the stuff that happens at this house. And that's how that first bout of things unfolded. But, without explaining conditions and how things are handled, and the way that a judge was able to not treat not only me not a criminal at that point, but didn't treat my father as a criminal.
That they listened to your,
Right, like that, and I would wage to bet that if it was just a judge that was, he was having to, listen to things. Judges, I will give you, like, I will trust that every judge is fair. I don't think otherwise. But I also know that a judge not familiar with the mental health side of things, where that's not their experience, they may say very easily, look, sir, I appreciate your story, but the letter of the law is you could not have removed this individual from a home, and then therein is the contempt. And
one of the things sorry, Eric, I don't mean to interrupt you. One of the things that was helpful to you is the fact that the judge was very familiar with your situation and what and the kinds of treatment and that you have received, as well as kind of familiar with your parents and the kind of your family members and the kind of support that you had. I'm just going to ask you a few more questions because I really want us to open it up to question and answer. Can you talk about what a day in your life is like now, Eric? Now that you're in treatment and you're doing well, and what is it like?
So AOT intervened in my life, and it took me from a path of delusion and danger to me becoming an accomplished habitual honor student. And because of AOT, I can proudly report to each of you paying attention to this webinar today that I am on track to graduate from my university in the top 10% of my class, and I'm looking forward to grad school so that I may pursue a career in mental health to repay my debt to our wonderful society for the second chance at life afforded to me by AOT. So I'm a happy, healthy, functioning, and productive member of society who lives each new day to actualize my potential and dreams. And AOT ensured that I could do that and enjoy that free from my demons of mental illness. And I'm able to also tell you that AOT has allowed me to see the day in which I'm no longer a danger to myself or others, a day in which I can faithfully execute the needs of my own medical treatment without a judge or doctor needing to order that I do so, and a day in which that I can stand here and voice to you all my gratitude for assisted outpatient treatment, giving me another chance at life. And right now, a day in my life looks like a complete justification for why AOT needs to exist. And if you don't agree with that, then I take the responsibility and blame of not doing a good job of explaining where I was at before AOT and where I'm at.
Yeah. So, Eric, I think I just have a few more follow-up questions, and then we're going to open it up. I mean, Eric, one of the things, you and I have talked about is how important it just wasn't the treatment and, you're actually returning home and living in what you call your man cave with your parents and receiving their support, but being able to apply and accept and be deemed eligible for Social Security benefits has been an important part of your recovery process. Can you talk a little bit about what assistance, if any, did you and your family get in order for you to apply for those benefits, and what an impact that having those benefits has really had on your ability to attend college, to live, to live and have a life in the community?
Sure. So that's a great question, and this goes back to, while I was on the outpatient side of things, I have a social worker who was assigned to me as, just like there's a doctor, there's a judge, there's the medical staff, etc. There's a social worker who's assigned, a caseload, and I was assigned to a number of individuals over the time. But when it came time to apply for those, those monetary benefits, the assistance from the government, the social worker assigned to me sat down with me. I walked me through how to, sign up for it. They didn't charge a fee for that. This is a worker employed by the Center for Mental Health Care Services, assigned to work with the AOT program. And so I was assisted in signing up for that. The social worker also helped me sign up for, at the time, what was a community college application, because the dream of a university education at that time for me was unattainable, unrealistic, and I couldn't think I could do it. But, community college, I thought, let's give this a try, because at least I found a way to believe in myself from this AOT program, that if I can, make it out of the AOT program, make it out of inpatient, make it out of outpatient, perhaps I can tackle community college. And the social worker helped me all along the way, and it was time consuming. It's not at all easy to apply for disability or Social Security benefits, but ultimately I was granted them. It's not an incredible amount of money, but I don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and I understand that money helps someone like myself who's bipolar disorder, despite the fact that I am, it's been 5 years since I've been hospitalized or on a court order. bipolar is for life. Luckily, I'm on a medicine that's proven to have me more stable than others. But the fact that there was a social worker assigned to help me through the process of how to get and not how to get, but how to sign up for them and have the government determine whether I should get them or not. That was value. You can't put a price on how valuable that was. Although I suppose some people do, because there are folks who charge for that, and that's a shame that they are preying on the weak and the infirmed, such as myself at that time. But luckily, I was directed, thanks to the AOT team, to a social worker who helped me get through all of that without, having to, pay them fees for doing so. And my parents, they never had to apply for stuff like that, so they didn't know. The rest of my family didn't know. It was absolutely indispensable that a social worker helped me through all of that. I think I see you asking another question, Laverne, but
I said a lot of us with, lived experience, there are kind of losses that we experience, and one of them is kind of, the rite of passage of college. So can you talk about how important it was for your social worker to really use a strength-based approach and really talk to you about your future and the fact that, you could live a meaningful life in the community, attend college, and do anything virtually that you wanted to do?
Sure. So I appreciate that you pointed out that was a strength-based approach. I also am a fan of that, because if you can get with people on what they can do versus focusing on what they can't, that's, at least personally speaking, like, I'm of the opinion that's a great approach, and that's exactly what the social worker did. And further to answer your question, that social worker didn't just, sit down with me to fill out these forms and help me apply to college and help me get, apply for my benefits. He also drove me to the community college to have a meeting with their disability counselor so that we could all interact on what I would need to do to register for any special accommodations on campus. And I would like to say that this social worker, while on the surface it looks like they went above and beyond, they really were doing the job that they loved to do, and they did go above and beyond. And he didn't need to do that, but the judge the judge and the management team who will oversee what the social workers are supposed to be doing in a given day said, this is something that, take time to do this. Like, we're going to make room in your schedule so you can do this. And without having a team that are familiar with me, a judge, a doctor, this whole AOT team I keep going back to, that social worker easily said, look, here's the number to call, here's a website to go to, this is how it's done. But they helped walk me through it, and really didn't. No one in the AOT program threw me in and said swim. They made educated decisions along the way that were appropriate for my point of my recovery, and the whole team really took a strength-based approach in doing so. I'm sorry, Laverne, I can't hear you again.
I know. Thank you very much, Eric.
Oh, okay.
And thank you for your your really open and honest discussion of your experiences. But I'm sure there may be a number of questions in the audience. So what we're going to do, the lines are open. So if anyone has a question, you have an option of you can ask the question now of Eric and just talk on the phone, or you can put a question in the chat box. And so, Eric, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be watching the chat box, so you don't have to worry about that. So is there anyone, I think Cindy Gibson right now from Baldwin County AOT, they're typing a question. But in the meantime, does anyone have a question for Eric? Okay. Eric, one of the things you really talked about was that, okay, so Cindy Gibson in Baldwin County have a question, Eric. What do you think the single most important thing about AOT was for you? What was one thing? If you have to think about one thing, what was it?
Sure. Thank you very much for your question. The single most important thing to me is that, it's really twofold. One, that I was lucky enough that the AOT program existed where I live, because there are plenty of areas where it doesn't. And not only that it exists, but it was the positions like judge, doctors, social workers, nurse, those people that were in those positions, they all cared, because it's one thing for AOT to exist, But if the people that are heading it aren't proactive and knowledgeable and really doing what it is that the AOT program requires of them, the program itself is meaningless. So the fact that it existed is most important, and equally that the people in the positions as part of the program were fulfilling their duties and going above and beyond them. Had I lived in another area, I'm not calling out California intentionally, but a few years ago when I was asked to help convince elected representatives to vote to enact a law that would allow AOT or something like it to be in existence there. Prior to that, it was a matter of, the police will deal with it and they'll use their judicious reasoning to determine what to do. And I just have to respectfully disagree with that's the way things are handling. And I'd like to add that California jurisdiction has since implemented measures to help deal with people that would benefit from an AOT program. And I was personally thanked by them, which I bring up not to toot my own horn, but I bring up because they were appreciative enough to reach out and say, hey, look, we had this all wrong, and the fact that this exists is a necessity. And I hope that other people trying to advocate for AOT help others see that as well.
Yeah. So Eric, just stepping back a bit, I think one of the things that is remarkable about your story is that that it was key that interactions that you had in your community with law enforcement were as positive as they could be under the circumstances. In other words, you had officers who were trained in, crisis intervention, so that the way that they interacted with you, there was an understanding. Can you talk about how important it is, perhaps even for a community, to have crisis intervention as part, particularly where they have AOT, to have crisis intervention teams as part of that whole kind of tapestry of services that are available?
Sure. And a great way of addressing this question is to briefly just look at how things were handled at one point with me and then how things were handled at a later point. So at the earlier point, when I was arrested for trespassing, the police were called. I was arrested and put in the criminal justice system, despite the fact that they were made aware of by my parents of the men's illness. Now, fast forward to the time that was my very last two hospitalizations, or it was just that brief several-week period. At that time, when I was, I had to head back to the hospital, police were called. But now at this later time, the police that were called, they showed up in it was an unmarked police car, but they showed up and they were trained and specifically ready for someone such as myself who were going to be taken to the hospital. So the police were called and they showed up and they were very measured and kind, and they said, look, we don't want to put handcuffs on you, but we are required now to take you to the state hospital. So if you please get into the back of our car, we'll be able to take you there and no handcuffs will be needed. If you resist, we'll have to handcuff you and we'll still take you to the state hospital, but we can make this very, very, basically do it the easy way or the hard way. They didn't say it that way because that sort of sounds, passive-aggressive threatening. But it was basically the option of, we're here for you. Regardless, you're going to be going to SASH, but if you just get in our car in the back, we'll take you and there's no handcuffs. And that's not how in comparison to my original trespassing arrest where I was handcuffed, taken to jail, I had to strip and sit in the jail cell completely naked for a period of time where they looked through my clothes. It was night and day comparing how I was treated by police at that time, which were doing their job, versus how police were treated at a later time, also doing their job, but trained in crisis intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Eric, I'm just going to follow up because I know a lot of times people are often, when we're maybe in the throes of our illnesses, there's a feeling, some people may feel that the issue of kindness and respect, that there may not be things that we perceive and things that are at our lowest moments that really give us hope. So can you talk about that a little bit, how even though you weren't well, that interaction and that respect and the dignity that you were able to maintain, even though the police were going to transport you to the state hospital, what a difference that may have made in kind of your whole recovery process.
Yes, and so by comparison, the time where I was and I have to underscore, the police who arrested me for trespassing took me to jail, took my clothes, put me in handcuffs, and I'm sitting in a jail cell completely naked. They were doing their job. Now, while I acknowledge that, I must also say, even though I was like not necessarily a member of all of reality, it felt incredibly dehumanizing. I was like, what? Like I couldn't fully comprehend like what I had done wrong that necessitated that I be, you know, handcuffed and naked, because I had never been involved with, you know, being incarcerated or law enforcement before, and I was like, why am I sitting here naked in a cell? And like, you know, I kind of felt like I was treated like an animal, and despite, you know, being, you know, delusional at the time, it was not a good feeling on top of already not good feelings I was experiencing. Versus the police who were, you know, say like they were, the police who, you know, offered me the choice of handcuffs or not. I did not feel dehumanized. You know, I still wasn't a part of reality, but it was, it's important because there's carryover to the mindset of how someone is when they're, you know, removed from the police custody and handed off to somebody. And if I'm handed off somewhere being treated like a criminal, stripped of all my clothes, and taken somewhere versus, you know, being treated with dignity and respect, you know, there's not enough that can be said for that. And I would also have to acknowledge that there are some people that, you know, if they're so far gone that it doesn't matter if you're treating them with dignity and respect, because not that it doesn't matter, but like they can't discern at some point between being treated with respect and not, because that's how far they may be gone in reality. But those crisis intervention police officers, had I been like that, are trained with how to handle that situation if it escalates versus unnecessarily escalating things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, thank you very much. And I'm just going to give people an opportunity. I have a few follow-up questions, Eric, but I also wanted to open it up to folks before I asked a few questions or made a few comments myself. All right. And I hear you, Eric. I think one of the things that I know I can remember myself, or, you know, about my kind of experiences with the mental health system, is that I can remember that I was extremely depressed and in a very, very bad state of mind, and hadn't bathed or other things for a very long period of time. And I can remember that once a decision was made that I was going to be admitted into the hospital, I can remember the nurse taking me into the triage room. And I knew I lit up the room. Even though I was in the throes of my illness, I knew I didn't smell good. And I can remember the nurse waiting until my attention was diverted and just flicking up the window a little bit. They didn't bring out the can of Lysol and disinfect the whole place, but there was something, and I think I hear this in what you're saying as well, there was something about the fact that somebody cared that at that point gave me a little bit of hope. It wasn't a whole kit and caboodle of hope, but it did say to me, God, somebody cares about how I feel and doesn't want to hurt me or harm me, you know. And so I think one of the great messages for that, you know, I think that we're trying to give is that kind of the kindness, the respect, and the compassion goes a long way, and that those are things that you don't forget, and they are things that you do remember. So thanks a lot, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to kind of share to be in a safe space with you, to share my experiences with you, and
thank you
in the hope that, yeah. So Eric, what's some advice you would give to parents or other family members about how they can be most supportive? And here we're not just talking about, okay, we have a question from Cindy. Cindy asked, what services were significantly different that you got when you were on the assisted outpatient treatment order than the traditional outpatient services that you would have gotten otherwise?
Okay, just to clarify before I answer, is the question, how do I think things would have unfolded in the absence of the AOT outpatient?
No, I think what they want to do is for you to really talk about the services that you got, you know, the enhanced services you got as a result of being a part of the AOT program, and how they may have been different when you were not on an AOT order. So you can just share that with the group.
Sure. So I can tell you what it was like in the absence of an AOT order, because prior to the first time I was put on one, I was taken to jail. And at that point, of course they have medical staff in jail, but they didn't have the medicine that I needed, excuse me, and I was essentially being treated as a criminal. Every aspect of my life, for the most part, was dictated by what the guards inside, if it was time to shower, I had to shower. It was time to go out for be in the yard, it was time to go in the yard. It was time to eat, time to eat. It was I was treated like a criminal, essentially. But once the order set in, the AOT, the enhanced services that I was able to receive were that a doctor was doing the job of looking at my meds, a judge was doing a good job of looking at me to oversee things to make sure that legal protocol was being followed. I had a social worker who was basically the most often mouthpiece between myself and the judge and doctor if need be. I had the social worker who took me to the colleges, helped me figure out how to fill out necessary government forms. These services would not have existed if I was not transferred from a jail to the state hospital. It was completely night and day. And I'd like to add too that when I was taken to the state hospital, probably for the first at least week or two that I was there, I still felt like a criminal. The carryover from jail was still there. It was huge. I thought that was part of my paranoia of thinking other people were going to hurt me, because all the fights that I saw in jail, I was like, hey, this is how it's going to be in the hospital. I started looking at everybody as being suspect, partially founded upon how everyone was in jail. And it just really made things worse.
Yeah.
So the enhanced services of AOT and of the figureheads that oversaw me on the inpatient and outpatient side of things, it was night and day in comparison to me being.
And Eric, I think if you can be more specific about not just the people but the kinds of services, whether when you were back into the community but still technically under the AOT order. I mean, how were those services different, if you're able to say, from services that you have received previously in the community? Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So the part of the services that I received, the enhanced services, they included something as part of me being on the outpatient program, that I would go before a judge in an informal setting, and that judge would be there. My doctor would also be there. Nurses would be there. My social worker would be there. And it was really an informal hearing, but the purpose of this enhanced service, of this informal hearing that was set up for me and other people scheduled that day to go through the same thing I was going through of seeing this informal hearing, was that, they'd be able to size me up very well. The doctor would look at me, they'd hear what I was saying, look at my behavior, and determine, is the medicine I was currently on appropriate? Did it need an increase in dose? Did I need to be put on something else? The judge would look at me and be able to determine, hey, is this someone that's still fit to be, for the most part, out in society without being stuck in a hospital? And those services, they don't exist for people not on the program. At that point, there isn't stopgap measures of medical professionals and legal professionals saying, hey, here's some fine-tuning we need to do. Or for some folks who aren't doing well, they will put them right back from that hearing to transport them straight back to a hospital. And all of that stuff that's part of the life-saving measures that are founded upon the enhanced services of the AOT program. I hope I addressed that question.
Yeah.
If not, I look forward to So
it sounds like, Eric, what you're saying is that there was a team that came together and really provided work for you in addition to, and they worked together. And that issues like, for example, I think you talked previously about the whole issue of the pharmacology, that initially you were on medication that that didn't work. But here you feel that, with the psychiatrist and the rest of the team, that if the medication stopped working or you needed something different, then indeed you were in a place where you could express that you could express those feelings and actually have someone act on them.
Yes, that's definitely the case. And as carryover, if they did fine-tune my meds, which, they did, it wasn't necessarily serious changes, but if changes were made, I would have to check in with my social worker. I was instructed to have them check in with me more often. And if I was
Yeah.
doing very, very, very well, I would check in with the social workers slightly less. And the people, pulling those levers are people very experienced in dealing with those with mental illness.
Okay.
So it wasn't like a judge and doctor were looking at me like, yeah, he's fine. Let's just talk with him less. Like, it was all very measured. And these enhanced services helped me be reintegrated back into society in the absence of a needed AOT order.
Okay. And when you were out, I mean, did your social worker visit your home when you were in the community? Can you talk about how what was different? What about those services were really important and made a difference in your recovery?
Sure. So, yes, the social worker did visit my house and, sit, speak with me, make a few notes, and if need be, in addition to taking me to college to fill out, or to meet with folks and help me fill out my applications, this individual also, it's in need of transportation. Like, I wasn't driving yet at this point. Like, I wasn't, because that was just, I believe, an agreement between the judge and my parents. It was like, you can't give him access to keys, and I didn't have access to keys, really. So I would be transported down, like when I had, at first it was weekly meetings with a doctor or and a judge. Then it became by, twice a month, and then it became, once a month. But my social worker would pick me up and pick, several other people up, and that would be, he would be my social worker was my transportation. It was my lifeline to the AOT program between the doctor and the judge. All of these things are a product of everyone doing their job as part of the AOT team.
Great.
And without that, that I could speculate where I'd be, but
Where you'd be right now.
Yeah.
So, Eric, I have a final, one other question is that, often, despite our best efforts, we experience crises, and so now you're doing extremely well. And I just wanted to open up, what, if any, crisis plan have you made with your parents and or your treatment providers should, you begin to experience symptoms again, or you run into any kind of difficulty? Can you talk a little bit about how important that really is for you to feel safe?
Sure. So as you might guess, the fact that I'm currently on a medicine prescribed by a doctor, a psychiatrist, necessitates that I see that psychiatrist so that he can also, look at me and make sure all is well in the world. And I've involved my parents as a necessity as part of my treatment plan, because that's who I've chosen to make my support team, and that's who have stepped up when I needed support. Prior to, AOT, when everyone began to step up when I was part of that. But the reason I bring that up is because I've involved them with my, they both met my psychiatrist, and they've spoken with him face-to-face at my request, at his request, and at my parents' request as well. And this is when I first, became a patient of his. And him being aware of the extent of my history, he has the ability first as a doctor to, do his official doctor thing and take the measures of committing me if need be. But I also have a line of communication set up between my parents and him. If the doctor feels like he needs to say something, he doesn't need to contact me. He can contact my parents. I've given, there's medical power of attorney that exists with my parents, and I've signed forms so they can hear all this stuff. And, he, as a doctor, as someone who relies upon numbers, he has told me at this point, I got out in February of 2012 from the hospital. He says, at my age and at the data that's available, it is statistically unlikely that I ever end up hospitalized again, based on the fact that, based on the info that he's looked at that says people like myself and of my age, of my experience, of my diagnoses, if they're out of an inpatient order for 5 straight years without being taken back to a hospital, the likelihood of them ever being hospitalized again is not statistically significant at all. And that's huge, because that speaks to the immeasurable number of savings that of time, energy, resources, money that are saved by me statistically being unlikely to ever end up in a hospital again.
And it sounds like hearing that message was important to you. For you to be as optimistic as you can be about your future. So it sounds like, and again, I just want to be clear, you've created a healthcare proxy or an advance directive with your parents. Okay, good. Okay. Because I know that some of the, some of the programs are really thinking about that and the ways in which it can really be helpful and really bring together, individuals and their families and really creating crisis plan when an individual is not able to maybe make decisions for him or herself. How long were you, and I think Martha has a question, and this is going to be the last question before we close. Martha wanted to know from Ventura County, how long were you in the AOT program, Eric?
Okay, so when I was initially put in the AOT program and I was hospitalized for the first time at the beginning of '09, I had just come out of inpatient, and it was '09, and I was part of their, outpatient program. I was a part of that for several months. The actual number on that, I don't believe it's a set number for everybody because there are individual differences that are involved. But for me, it was set up for a year, but I was doing very, very, very well. And the judge made his decision while speaking with, the team. He didn't make the decision himself, but they made the decision that at that time I was fit to be removed from the program. And even though I was hospitalized again, the ease with which I was brought back to the hospital has, almost entirely to do with the fact that there was a record on me of inpatient and outpatient care, so they knew how to treat me. And ultimately, this very last time that I was discharged, I was again set up for a year initially, and several months in, the decision was made to allow me to go off of the AOT order. And since that time, I have not missed a medicine dose. I have not missed a medical appointment, a doctor appointment. I have, changed my diet, exercise, all of these tools that I've learned while inpatient and outpatient from these teams of professionals. And hopefully, once I get my graduate degree, in addition to doing this advocacy work, I would love to help others that are in a position like myself and other families who are feeling like it's hopeless or at the very, at the very worst, help.
Yeah.
Like, sure we could help, but there's no end to this. And I want people to understand that there is indeed an end to this, and it doesn't have to end in chaos and tragedy. AOT
wow,
is
Eric. Yeah, I think your words, I'm almost speechless because I think what you said is what many, folks feel, that it's not the end of the world, that a diagnosis doesn't have to be the end of a life, and that treatment can be helpful, and that, that it's really, that people can and do recover, that indeed we need services in the community, easy access, because what I hear from you is that basically not only did you have people who cared about you, but a lot of the barriers, whether it was transportation, whether it was having a consistent psychiatrist who was with you for more than 6 months or a year, but someone who knew you intimately, as well as your family, to really kind of help not only you, but support the family through your experiences was really important. The idea of peer support when you were in the inpatient unit of really giving you an idea of maybe what recovery looked like, that there was hope, that your diagnosis didn't mean, right, that it was the end of the world. So we've gone a little bit over, and what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to thank you, Eric, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric, and give you a few minutes to really, if there's one thing that you want everyone sitting on the call today, whether they're a staff member, a family member, or a person receiving treatment, is there one message that you want them to leave with today?
Yes, that would be contact your elected representatives in your area and let them know your thoughts. Not necessarily, if you disagree with me, please write them and say that as well. I don't want to, say my opinion is the way that it is. But
Eric, I don't mean to interrupt you, but these are all programs who already have assisted outpatient treatment programs existing. So, I mean, what do you, just in terms of the ways in which services are provided, how, what would you want them to leave today's call with?
Well, if they're already part of areas that are doing it, first off and foremost, I'd like to thank you for taking part in your interest or your active role, if that's the case, in AOT. And I want to let you all know that the work that you do and the care that you have, it does have real world implications. And I think all of you, I may not know you personally, and I may not have even spoken with y'all before, but the fact that I'm here speaking to you now is a testament to the work that you do, and I sincerely thank you for that.
And Eric, I'm confident that we'll be seeing you do great things, and that you'll be a wonderful counselor, whatever field you choose to, whether it's psychiatry, whether it's psychology, or mental health counseling, because it sounds like you'll be able to add your own personal experience, added to kind of the other kinds of knowledge that you'll obtain to really, as you kind of eloquently said today, really save lives. And so I really want to thank you for sharing some of the most intimate parts of your life with us. I'm sure all the folks on the call wish you the best of luck. And thank you for putting a face on assisted outpatient treatment. But as importantly, thank you for putting a face on what recovery looks like and how important it is to have hope.
And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do that. So thank you, Laverne, and everybody at your organization. And I do see here at the bottom right that Miss Cindy Gibson and Baldwin County AOT Group said thank you, Eric. I would like to say you're welcome and thank you as well.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Enjoy their weekend. And next Friday from 4 to 5:15, we'll be hearing from Eric's mom, Miss Nancy Smith. So we'll hope that you can join us. Take care very much, Eric, and thank you.
Thank you.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.